Evening, everyone. Hello. So, yes, let's recap what's happened in the last week in the Iran war. Because, I mean, I just say on the thing here, oh, Israel admits it had no plan. And, there'll be people quite reasonably thinking, well, this is hardly breaking news, Phil. This is hardly breaking news. Because, from the start, it didn't look like there was a plan. We've been saying for like over 2 weeks now, there didn't seem to be a plan. In fact, I have likened it to the 3 day special operation, and that is more on the nail than you would think. But that was based on observations. In the past week, I have to be a bit careful about this. So when I say the US and Israel have both basically admitted they have no plan, obviously the Prime Minister of Israel and the United States President have not stood up and gone, yeah, do you know what? We just thought we could drop a few bombs and they'd surrender. And they haven't done that. And we didn't really have a plan beyond that. They're not going to say that. So we get this information. Actually, in the US, there have been some on record statements from Israel. They're described as the way the Guardian describes it is multiple Israeli security sources. So basically, we've been told this by people who would know. No one's going to give their name because it's really embarrassing, right? But nonetheless, it is what it is. The fact of the matter is the information we've got. So we now know this. This is now being reported. This is what they thought. This is both Israel and the United States. This is what they thought going in. They thought that because of the recent protests in Iran, there's a real hunger to get rid of the regime here. So then they thought, because Trump as well, I suspect, he'll be at fault here, more ways than one, because he will have been saying, because he was saying all this stuff, you need to take over your regime. Yeah, we'll be behind you. We'll be behind you. We'll help you. We'll support you militarily if necessary. And then, Trump would say, if the regime starts killing the people on the streets, we'll come in and we'll come in. And he never went in. But maybe Israel thought to themselves, at that point, chance here. So, but what we're getting from the Israeli intelligence sources that were willing to talk off the record to journalists is this was what they thought. They thought, right, there's a real hunger to get rid of the regime. We will bomb the crap out of it. And then the Iranian people will rise up and replace this regime with one that likes us, and everything will be happy and glorious. And they've gone further and suggested that now that hasn't happened. First of all, they are making it clear, by the way, they didn't think this because Israeli intelligence had told their government. This isn't an intelligence failure, by the way, because it was just based on vibes. They just thought, the politicians basically just thought this would happen. And now that it hasn't happened, they're now stuck thinking, because in a military campaign you need a military objective, right? You need to give something for your military, like the generals and the admirals and so on. They need a clear objective. They can't come up with a strategy if you don't have an objective, right? So now they're trying to work out what the objective is. It seems, again, according to this reporting via Israel, they don't think removing the regime is viable, because they really don't believe they can bomb it out of existence. They were sort of hoping for Iranians to rise up. Now, I mean, I'd been saying that for a while because that's what Trump was saying. So that seemed to be the plan. He was constantly saying, rise up, free yourselves from these bastards. And that hasn't happened. So now they're thinking to themselves, shit, we can't just stop the war, because they could stop it last year because they claim, it's because the nuclear thing. Then Trump says, I've bombed the nuclear stuff. Don't worry about it. And they went, okay, all right. But now that they've decided that didn't do anything, they're a bit stuck. There's only two ways that America, I suppose 3 ways. Let's just be fair. Let's say there's 3 ways America can come out of this without looking stupid. The first is if it actually does bring the regime down. Never mind that'll create a power vacuum and create something even worse after it, like we saw in Iraq. In that moment, they'll be able to claim victory, right? But that doesn't look like happening. Okay. We don't even know that the regime is led by someone who's conscious. I mean, that's the situation, isn't it? We don't actually know that the new supreme leader is even conscious or even alive. And it doesn't seem to matter. It's all right, Pete Hegseth going, oh yeah, we heard he's been basically disfigured and he's knackered and he can't do anything. He's saying that as if it's a good thing. It's a bad thing, mate, because what it means is that Iran potentially has a puppet leader, which is what they wanted, but for the Revolutionary Corps, not for Trump. And it doesn't seem to matter to them. It's making no difference. They're not running around with like headless chickens because they may or may not have a conscious supreme leader. And so yeah, they don't think they can get rid of the regime. Second option is, okay, so the threat is the nuclear threat. We'll focus on that now. We'll forget about the regime change because we don't think we can do it. The nuclear threat, right? So that's what they've settled on as being the objective. So if you can take Iran's enriched uranium, then you can claim victory then, even if the regime is in place, because it's like, well, we've taken the sting off the bee, right? It's quite tricky. It's quite tricky. So just to be clear, this like uranium hexafluorine is in canisters, lots of canisters. Now, they're not going to be spread all over the country, but they may not all be in one site, right? So in order to take them from Iran, you'd have to launch a ground invasion of the sites they're kept at. You would face heavy losses because they'll be very well defended. And then so you've got to get in. You can't just take a strike team in, like happened with Venezuela, because you're going to need engineers who aren't combat operatives. So you're going to need a large force to be able to get in there with the equipment to be able to take these canisters away, with the engineers and with all the forces necessary to keep those engineers alive. And there might be more than one site where these things are kept at. And if you did come up with a plan to go in and take them and stuff like that, and what happens if your intelligence is a bit duff and it's where they were being kept, but then they moved them while you were planning on it, so then you break into an empty warehouse. That's just embarrassing. So that's also very, I mean, I don't even think we're even talking difficult here. We may be talking impossible. That there's a lot of people saying this does not sound like the sort of thing that you can expect American and Israeli special forces to be able to carry out. Even Trump has said to do it, they'd have to pretty much obliterate Iran's army, which is like, well, there's 500,000 of them, mate. If you count the Revolutionary Guard, the regular army and the reserves, they've got 500,000 on call. Right. So that's difficult. So then your third option becomes a nuclear deal, which is what Trump was trying to negotiate before Israel on 2 occasions basically decided to bomb Iran, knackering those talks. And the problem now is twofold. The first is Iran doesn't trust America on talks anymore, because now twice they've tried to conduct talks from their point of view in good faith. I don't know whether it's in good faith or not, but from their point of view in good faith with America. And on 2 occasions, those talks have been interrupted by American bombs. Israeli bombs, last year, Israeli bombs first and then American bombs. But nonetheless, those talks have been disrupted twice by America just saying, you know what, we're bored, we're just going to bomb you for a bit. So Iran is not all that keen on getting into other talks again, just because it's like, well, we can't trust you. And the second thing is, at the moment, because the Iranian regime, I don't know whether they're laughing to themselves, because they are being bombed, but and more of them are probably going to die. But they are looking at this and thinking, Jesus Christ, after all these decades, they finally attacked us and they didn't have a plan for it. They can't believe their luck. So the Iranian regime thinks, if anything, this is bolstering them. Because remember, what does an autocratic regime do to hold itself together? Look at Russia. Why is Putin still in power? Why haven't the Russian people risen up against Putin? There's multiple reasons, but ultimately it comes down to this. Putin has convinced them that there are all these threats against Russia, by the way, I just have to keep being clear, there are no threats against Russia. Of all the countries in the world that might want to invade other countries in the world, no one wants to invade Russia. It's a shithole. Every part of it is, I mean, people make the best of it, but you see so many documentaries of life in this part of Russia or that part of Russia, and it's like all grim. All grim. Anyway, it's my opinion, of course. Some people may like Russia. It's a shithole. So no one wants to invade Russia. It's too difficult and it's not worth it. But nonetheless, Putin has convinced enough of his people that they need to accept these privations because they are facing threats. He is protecting them from all these threats, right? Well, Iran would like to do the same because it's how autocratic leaders stay in power, by saying, I am protecting you. You might not like my methods, but I am protecting you from the wolves outside the walls. And this just helps that. This helps it because Iran now can claim this is what we were protecting you from. Right? Absolutely mad. Saying, to be fair, people are asking whether Netanyahu is alive too. I think he pops up, though. He does pop up, whereas the new Khomeini hasn't. I still think we haven't even had so much as a voice message. We've had a message relayed on his behalf. So there's been people in Iran, like the news and so on, saying this message was relayed to me from so-and-so. So basically, there's not even any journalist saying I've seen him personally. But there we go. It says, this world's getting absolutely screwed. People just do not know what's down the pike. Well, no, we do know. I mean, at the very least, we're going to have now a global downturn. It could be quite a serious one. Because you think about, the thing about a global downturn is it's never really one thing. It might have one spark that sets the fire, but it's never one thing. It spreads. So, and you can sort of imagine this tangled web of cause and effect. So, for example, ultimately, what's happened here is a passage has been blocked. It's really just for oil and gas. But nonetheless, so you put up oil and gas prices and it's like, okay, so now that puts up the cost of electricity in any country where the price is pegged to oil or gas, which it is in still most countries. Then you put up the price of transporting goods everywhere, even the countries that have now got their energy grid on renewables, they still haven't got all of their internal transport on renewables, like as in electric vehicles. And even if they had, the cost of shipping, either exporting or importing, cargo ships don't run on electricity. So they're still, and nor do planes, so they're still oil oil derivatives. So the cost of transporting any goods has gone up. And then you think about this. So we think about like America, when we're trying to say the American economy, Trump's really screwed it in so many ways because a combination of his tariffs, his one big beautiful bill, and now this war has made doing business in America more difficult. It was supposed to help business in America. It's made it more difficult, as well as business elsewhere, but it's made it more difficult in America. And so when you sort of say, yeah, Trump's really screwing the economy there, and you look at the GDP, but the GDP's growing, it's fine. The stock market's, better than it was last year. It's all grand. And, there's been the odd dip, but you get dips, and then it goes back up again, higher than it ever was. It's great. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But people are also mentioning, but it's all been dragged up by these tech companies driving AI. So all of this investment is all for AI. And there's already people thinking, and I've heard compelling arguments both ways. Is there a bubble? Will it burst? Blah, blah, blah. Something like this makes it more likely because it's a cost reward calculation, isn't it? With your investments. At the moment, it is possible that AI will become extremely profitable. It's not profitable right now. It's costing a fortune, but it may become profitable in the future. It may or may not. I can think of arguments for and against. But we know we don't know what profits it will generate. And it doesn't, those profits can be generated in 10, 20, 30 years time as far as investors are concerned. When you're an investor, you're not I mean, there are some buy the dip idiots who don't know what they're doing. But by and large, when you're investing over a long period of time. Like if you're investing in stocks and shares and things, if it's not for at least 10 years, then what are you even doing? It's not a way to make a quick quid. Which is why I'm not. I mean, I look at my stocks and shares that I started last year, and you should see the big hole that Trump's blown in them. But again, it's like, yeah, but I'm not drawing it out now. I'm drawing it out, as I get closer to retirement or semi-retirement, whatever I do. So it's a long way off yet. But nonetheless, if you massively increase the cost of electricity. And America is definitely not a country with a government that says, yeah, we don't want the price of electricity having anything to do with the price of oil and gas. So you've just ramped up the cost of data centers because they use enormous amounts of electricity. Absolutely mad. Rob saying, I've been to Russia, but I went in the Soviet era. Please come back, Lenin. Okay, it may have been worse in the Soviet era. There may at least be things on the shelves now, but it is just a shithole. SFAC's confirming that. He might be biased, but it is sort of. Chris saying, I will always stick with my saying you can't educate stupid. See, as a former teacher, I can't accept that. You can. It's laborious. You can. It's not easy. And but one thing as a former teacher I can also say is you can't educate the unwilling. So willful stupidity you can't educate because they won't do it. In fact, there was a bit of a meme poster we had in one of my staff rooms as a former teacher. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's just a bit of a bastard when the horse halfway across the desert keels over and blames you for the fact that it's dehydrated. Because that is sometimes what teaching is like. But anyway. Last time Netanyahu popped up, it looked very like AI to those who examine these things, apparently, which raised more questions than answers. Again, I mean, he's very old. We can believe that he's ill and sometimes won't, just like Trump, won't be fit for a public appearance, but he has been popping up. I don't think anyone seriously thinks he's dead or even incapacitated. John, they say, watched a video of Russian village 50 miles from Moscow and still the residents get their water from a well. It is, I mean, that country has never, ever had, it's amazing that a country that size has ever held itself together. And I take it as proof. Well, look, I can't say proof. I've got to be scientific. I take it as strong evidence that no one actually wants. Yes, we know Napoleon tried. Hitler tried. Hitler only wanted the oil, but then he went, oh, let's go for, whatever the hell. He wanted like a prize. But okay, so two megalomaniacs have tried. But by and large, sensible governments, even ones who are willing to invade, don't want to invade Russia. I can think of no other reason for Russia to have held itself together for so long, other than the fact no bugger wants it. Chris is saying, Phil, I was a classroom assistant in the prison classroom. Trust me, that phrase is very apt. Well, it is unfortunately how it is sometimes. Do you think that travel broadens the mind? You are asking the wrong person. I'll read the whole thing. So that people realise how stupid and naive they actually are. You would think so. It makes sense to me that it would. However, I have to say, as someone who is not well travelled, I cannot say from personal experience. And I do have ringing in my head Billy Connolly, who once said to that question, because he is well travelled, does travel broaden the mind? And he said, no, it narrows it. He thought it narrowed it. And I think his reasoning was because you go to all these places in the world and what you really discover is that throughout the whole world, everyone is basically stupid. So the same stupid shit you have in your own country, you find just basically everywhere. So yeah, so in Billy Connolly's case, he didn't think it broadened his mind, even though he clearly liked travelling and exploring new places. He obviously found the same type of human stupidity wherever he went. But anyway, but I just think it's absolutely incredible. I mean, I was looking at the story today. So Rachel Reeves has announced support for rising heating oil costs. So in parts of rural Britain, there are, apparently it's quite prevalent in Northern Ireland as well, there are a lot of people who for their heating, they don't have gas or electricity, they have oil heaters, particularly in rural areas. And that's not affected by the cap. So so people who need oil for oil heaters, they've been hit, well, just like people with petrol, they've been hit with an increase in the cost of it immediately. And for some of them, it's been really high. Because I suppose the other problem with rural areas as well is twofold. First of all, the transport's trickier anyway, because it was not as efficient, because you're delivering to like households that are spread out a bit. And of course, petrol's gone up as well for the delivery. But second of all, there may also be some profiteering there, right? And the government have been warning about that. And but it's not affected by any sort of cap. Like, realistically, we would expect, if the government don't do anything, Ofgem in a few months' time, when the new cap for autumn has to be announced, which is like in the middle of summer, they are going to announce an increase because it's pegged to the price of gas, and the price of gas, even in a few months' time, will be, even if the war ends tomorrow, the price of gas will still be elevated in a few months' time. So, yes, so the government are likely to have to do something about that. But the cap is in place at the moment. So the government don't have to announce anything yet. But she's announced that they're going to help. I don't know exactly what the deal is, but they're going to help with people facing this increase in costs now with the heating oil. And part of me looks at this and I just think this is what a shitty situation for a Labour Chancellor in particular. Because first of all, who are these people who need this help? And I agree they do need this help. They need help. But who are these people? These are people who, by and large, we know have voted Conservative and will still have voted Conservative at the last election, even though that is the government that allowed their electricity bills to go through the roof before they finally did something. And now they're sort of demanding help. And it's like, and it's all caused because Trump and Netanyahu wanted a war for which they had no plan. It's absolutely annoying, isn't it? It's desperately annoying. Because it makes no difference. I saw a thing earlier on with some Labour MPs, I'm going to guess they're Starmer supporters, they must be Starmer's allies, going, oh, this could be the making of Starmer, because, he's getting his position pretty well conveyed on Iran. I mean, just being against the Iran war is putting him in line with certainly most of the public that would be willing to vote Labour. But also the fact that he's not being cowed by Trump's that's another thing I need to mention. Sorry, little aside. I'm going to have to do a video on this. After 2 weeks of abuse from Trump our way, do you know what he's doing now? He's saying, oh, the UK and others need to help escort these tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. And it's like, well, we're already working on plans to do that. It's not easy. But look at what Trump's doing, right? 2 weeks of abuse. He says, oh, we don't need anything from you. We don't need anything from you if you can't be asked to join from the start. Now he's begging us to help clean up his mess. Like, why does the Strait of Hormuz need extra escorts, Trumpy boy? Why is it? Is it because of your war? Why weren't they needed a few weeks ago? Absolute peasant. So we're at the mercy of this dickhead. And yet, none of it will make any difference. All these Labour MPs that think, oh, this could be the making of Starmer, absolute bollocks, I have to say. Absolute bollocks. Because as far as people are concerned, the country will be quite happy to say, yeah, there's no way you can blame the British government for this. Doesn't matter. I mean, this is politics number one. Ultimately, and I've said this for years, ever since I've been doing this channel, ultimately, most swing voters, these voters who don't habitually vote any particular way, they just make their mind up at each election. They don't care about ideology. They don't care about what position you have on X, Y, or Z. They just care about the standard of living. Do they think that you are doing a good job when it comes to their standard of living? That's it. That's it. And if the answer is yes, they'll give you another crack. If the answer is no, then they won't. And so Labour at the moment, there's no point in them emphasising that this is all Trump's fault. I've in a separate article, I saw Labour MPs saying they want Starmer to do more to explain that this is Trump's fault. It doesn't matter. All the public care about is, because they know that Trump isn't going to do anything to help us. The only people that can do anything to help us is the UK government. And are they doing enough or not? But anyway. All the major energy suppliers have pulled their fixed deal. Shock horror. Well, I mean, I've noticed also, my wife was telling me banks are pulling a lot of mortgage products as well. Because, I mean, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen to interest rates. I mean, the Bank of England was sort of saying it's close to where we'd sort of think it would be long term. But there was being priced into the market maybe another couple of quarter point reductions. Maybe one come in like May or something. That was possible. No one thinks that's going to happen now. If anything, it might go up. Now, I would actually argue it shouldn't go up because, unless someone can explain this to me, here's the thing about the Bank of England are made responsible for inflation and so on. They only have so many tools. But here's the thing. Normally, if inflation is rising, what do? You raise interest rates to cool spending down. But how does that work? By making borrowing more expensive. Okay. Will the inflation be linked to too much borrowing? If the answer's no, then all you do by raising interest rates is hamper economic growth without doing anything to tackle inflation. So I hope that the Bank of England... The problem is, of course, the Bank of England are made... It's like, if inflation's above 2%, it's like, what are you doing about it? Now, at the moment, the Bank of England have been cutting interest rates because they've been able to say, we think inflation's going to fall down to 2% without, so we don't need to keep the interest rates high. We think it's going to fall down to 2%. Now they can't say that. So now people will say, so what are you doing about inflation if it starts to rise? And all they can do, there's only three things the Bank of England have power over. One, or two things they have power over, but three things they can do. One is interest rates, and the second is the amount of money in the system. So that's all they can do. They can raise or lower interest rates. They can increase the production of money. They can effectively reduce the supply of money, pounds. That's it. That's all they can do. So if you tell them they've got to do something, they've got to pick one of those things to mess about with. And whereas in reality, what we should be able to say to the Bank of England is, yes, you're responsible for inflation insofar as the tools you have that can affect it. But if you don't think the tools you have will make any difference, then don't bloody use them just for the sake of it. So yes, I mean, this is one of the things I feared at the beginning. Some of you may remember I would have said a couple of times as well. One of the things when Labour won, one of my first things I said was, can we just have a few chill years? Can we just have a few years of relative stability so that Labour can actually put something in place? And then, if it's not enough, then that's on them. But can they please just have a bit of breathing space? And then Trump won the election a few months later, and I went, oh, bollocks. And I've been saying, oh, bollocks a lot ever since. TLDR put out a video earlier saying that basically, despite Brexit, we're converging more and more with Europe. We are absolutely converging more and more with Europe. That was in the manifesto. Every time the Telegraph, which is, I keep having to say now, which is now owned by pro-EU German media company. But every time the Telegraph produce an article going about how this proves Keir Starmer always wanted to secretly take us back into the EU, and it's like, it's okay, all right. He's explicitly said he's not going to take us back into the EU or even single market or customs union. But everything else, there's no secret about it. It was in the manifesto. It was loud. He said, other than those, he had 4 red lines: EU membership, single market membership, customs union, freedom of movement. The freedom of movement is really disappointing, as is the customs union. But anyway, it is what it is. Those are the red lines. Beyond that, he says, I will move as close to the EU as I can. He says, those red lines aside, I want to move as close to the EU as possible on everything else. So I don't know why people think it's a surprise. I mean, it's not a surprise. The public even understood that. The Telegraph just, keep trying to push the Brexit buttons. In terms of the Telegraph, do you think it will slowly change to pro-Europe? So all I know is what they've said is then they're going to maintain its editorial independence, which is always good. However, like if you own a newspaper, it's easy to give it editorial independence. Just means you're not leaning over the editor's shoulder all the time. But who is it who appoints the editors? Like if I was to take over the Telegraph, like let's say I'd have won, more than that £181 million that some lucky bastard in Britain apparently won the Euro Millions last week. It wasn't me. As much as my wife was desperately saying to me, have you got an email? Have you got an email? No, I haven't. That wouldn't have been enough. But let's say, do you know what? Let's say Mark Zuckerberg, who is thinking about giving away all his money, so he says, said, Phil, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $5 billion, right? So I had plenty of money to do whatever I wanted. I've got a few plans. And one of them was like, I'll buy the Daily Telegraph, right? So let's say I could do that. I still might not be able to, because they might say, Phil, you've got no experience in journalism. What do you know? You'll just run it into the ground. But it's like, okay, I'll employ someone. I would get to choose the editors. So although I would give it its independence, I wouldn't interfere with the editorial decisions. I wouldn't have to, because I would hire editors who share my values. And I wouldn't need to. So, yeah, but the other thing is they've said they're not going to interfere with the editorial decisions, but they have also said that they also have no problem with the current editors, so they're keeping them in place. So at the moment, that's why I say don't expect any changes. However, editors move, so every now and then you do need new editors. All I would say is there must be a reason they wanted that title. Now, they may just have wanted the title to help link up, but how effectively does a pro-Brexit paper link up with all their other titles? Because given that, if you look, I'm not a regular reader of like Bild or Die Welt or anything like that. I occasionally will look at some articles in places like that, and Le Monde and a few other things as well around the world, because sometimes it's interesting to get the perspective from other countries in their big newspapers. But I'm not a big reader. But Politico, which is one of theirs, I do read regularly. There's no... So the Telegraph isn't a natural link for their titles. So it would be interesting. I do think to myself, consider the Telegraph is a very old paper, but it wasn't... The Telegraph as it is now is not how it was before the Barclay brothers brought it. So they changed it editorially. I'm not saying it was like a socialist paper before or anything like that. It was always a conservative paper. But it wasn't like this culture war fountain as it is now. That was the Barclay brothers. So, so you could easily imagine them when it comes time to getting new editors. I wouldn't say radically different, because then they might... It's like, killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. If you try and change your audience too quickly, you'll lose your established audience, and then, it takes time to build an audience up. So if you try to transition an audience, you have to do it quite slowly. But there it is. So in terms of Carol, they're saying, Sam, will wake up and smell the coffee boy. We have to ally with Europe now. Well, he is trying, I have to say. If you're talking about those red lines, in all honesty, there's not many of them he actually has the power to do. Like, we could talk about the customs union, but we wouldn't be able to have it in place before the next election. So it doesn't help us through this. Basically, if we're going to have an economy that allows Labour to stay in power at the next election, I have to say, EU, other than what he can do anyway, the red lines don't actually help. I mean, I would like it if we could openly say, look, it's a mistake, we need to go back. But even if we did that tomorrow, it wouldn't have any impact on the economy today, other than maybe a bit more investor confidence. But then with Reform UK waiting in the wings saying, but we will take us straight back out. And, would it even do that? So, yeah, I mean, at the moment, I think they are doing everything they can. Or, well, it's always hard to say everything they can. But I think they are doing what they can. Like, we can't, the only way we could join a customs union, like, quickly is just to agree to join the comprehensive customs union. So no negotiation, we'll just accept everything. That's not politically viable because that puts you in rule taker territory. So it has to be bespoke, which means it takes years. Then in terms of the single market, that would take, there is no established mechanism for doing it. So we'd definitely have to negotiate a bespoke entry into the single market. And that would also include negotiating with EFTA members as well as EU members. The EU cannot unilaterally let us in the single market. As for joining the EU proper, I mean, that would take years as well. Even if you think we could fast track, there would still have to be a lot of discussions around currency and stuff like that. And yeah, so there's nothing. Rob saying you'd invite journalists to actually do their jobs. If I'm going to be completely honest, so if I did somehow own the Telegraph, I somehow woke up a billionaire and could buy the Telegraph. It's too late now, someone's bought it. But if I could have done. I mean, you think to yourself, what would you do? Because I'm not stupid. I know that it doesn't do anything if I lose the audience. So I know that I need editors who are going to be good at the clickbait. Do you know what I mean? So it wouldn't be run as I run my channel, because for my channel, as long as I'm making enough, I don't like. I sometimes see other YouTubers, ones I like, on a personal level, but I sometimes look at, I'm mentioning no names, of course. I sometimes look at some of the stuff they do, and I just think I'd be too embarrassed to do that because it's too, you're hyping the shit out of something, or you're just making something of nothing or whatever. But there's also a sense in which that's just playing the game. I was discussing in my stream yesterday about, the AI audit of my channel, which is absolutely bang on the money. And I know the videos that do well on my channel. I know which ones are likely to do well and which ones are likely to bomb. And an editor of a newspaper like that has to consistently come up with the viral moments, whereas I don't. I can put videos out that I know are not going to do that well. I've put multiple out this week, like the one on Dunblane. I knew that was going to bomb. I was going to do it anyway. That's me indulging myself. The one on energy, renewable energy in this country. I knew that wasn't going to do well. I was going to do it anyway. So there's a couple I've put out this week that I thought would do better than they did. There's a couple that have done better than I expected. But by and large, I'm pretty accurate. And I will still do the ones that I know won't do well because I want to. So I'd have to get an editor that is good at doing the stuff that I would find cringeworthy. But you can find editors that at least share some basic values. And basically no culture wars. That's what I would say. Absolutely lean into, or I would rule out certain culture wars. Because there's a sense in which to be successful in the media, you do You have to be divisive. You have to be tribal. It's unfortunate. I hate it. So if I was to assign an editor, I would need someone who I wouldn't be getting people to run it like the Byline Times, because that's not, wouldn't work. At the end of the day, it's basically a tabloid. You have to treat it like a tabloid, but more like the Mirror than the Express, shall we say. But again, you can't shift it that quickly overnight. You have to nudge it. But they're saying, thank you for the Dunblane video. It's still very close to my heart, being a place I used to drive past often visiting family. Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel similar. I mean, I know what you mean. A little bit similar. It's a different event like Hillsborough. Because although Hillsborough is, of course, affects Liverpool most of all, but it was in my neck of the woods. It was in my backyard where it happened. You know, so things like that. You can't not be affected when it's really close to you. Right now, Hungary and Slovakia would veto any UK moves to rejoin the customs union single market. No, they won't. No, they won't. I'll tell you what they would do, though. Like they always do. Remember, you might have said that about NATO accepting new members a couple of years ago, and yet they did. Why? Because, first of all, you squeezed their balls a bit, but more specifically, you squeeze their balls while stuffing a few notes in their jacket pocket, because that's what they will do. They will start off, yes, they will start off going, no, we will veto it, but they'll just be after a bit. They'll just be after something, right? That's how the EU works, horse trading, right? So when one member state has been difficult about something, you've got carrots and stick. I mean, we've seen it in the last few years with Hungary. We've seen Hungary reluctantly doing things that it didn't want to do because of a combination of sanctions and rewards. So that's what will actually happen. There will be no barrier at all. There will be some who hold out for, because that's how the small members of the EU get stuff. They become difficult over something the big members want, and they get themselves some concessions. That's how it works. That's your horse trading. Went to primary school right next to Dunblane, a place called Cumald. It was a massive shock. I suppose it would be if you were very close to it. I mean, I do know my only little bit of trivia on it in terms of like individual people being affected beyond the immediate thing is Andy Murray came from there, didn't he? I mean, he wasn't in that year, but he came from there. He's talked about the effect on him, and he's younger, so he would have been. Was he even born then? I'm not sure. Portugal, Spain, Poland, Italy, France, some of the Scandinavian countries would never vote to consider the UK applicant for membership, all very different regions. No, they would. Honestly, they would. I hadn't appreciated Andy Murray was at school. I'm not sure if he was at that school. I think he may have been, but I think he was from that area. Oh, SFAT's there saying, Dunblane video also struck a note with me and worried about how idea of America-style gun ownership becomes popular here, that being Ukraine. I mean, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, countries that have the fewest gun deaths are the ones that have the fewest guns. It's really that simple. Because it's all right, people who say they're responsible and they'd never use it against a person like that. That's grand, great. I'm sure most people are like that. But there are people who want to murder people for whatever reason, whether they're mentally ill or that's just how they are, how they're wired. They want to murder people, and they want to murder people as easily as possible. And some people want to murder as many people as possible. So you get a weapon. If the easier it is to get a gun, the more likely you are to have these people getting guns and murdering people. Even because remember, if it's possible, and it's no good saying, well, you just restrict who can have access to these things. Well, first of all, you always have gaps in the system, but second of all, then they can obtain them illegally. Because again, if not everyone owns a gun. Even in America, not everyone owns a gun legally. There is still illegal ownership of guns in America because they have some restrictions. But because the supply of guns is so widespread, it makes it easier for criminals to supply you with a gun if you couldn't get one legally. So it's really this simple. You know, if you want fewer gun deaths, you can't ever have them at zero. But if you want fewer gun deaths, make it, you need just fewer guns in the country, physically in the country. I mean, you know, you can usually trust the armed forces to lock theirs up, but and armed police forces, but you know, in terms of in like the general community, don't have guns. And that's why if you look at a lot of the gun crime that we do have in the UK, and there's not much of it, it tends to be committed with really old guns, sometimes with Second World War guns, because it's really hard to get modern guns. You'd have to smuggle them into the country because it's almost impossible to have a valid reason for having them. But anyway. Maggie there's talking about Andy Murray there. I recall him talking about it when he won Wimbledon. Yeah, I seem to remember something like that. How would Little Englanders like to accept the euro and give back Gibraltar to Spain? So Gibraltar won't have to go back to Spain. Even the current Spanish government have said that wouldn't be a barrier. The euro, obviously, yeah, they would choke on their cornflakes, but you know. I also suspect that we wouldn't have to. There may be advantages to France and Germany in us not joining the euro. Because remember, if we joined the euro, I mean, it's like I would be in favour of it because it's another thing that makes trade easier. You would literally boost trade. If you trade, it's different currencies is a form of trade friction. There's lots of things. There's lots of like types of trade friction that people don't really talk about. You know, we think about the big things. Like, another thing is I'll mostly talk about because it's the easiest things to convey. So you think about distance, geographic distance, that's a trade barrier. You think about regulatory divergence, that is because the more your regulations diverge, the more paperwork you need and the more checking you need. You know, so there's lots of really big forms of trade friction, but there's little ones as well. So currency, when you're trading in different currencies, there's a cost of transforming the currency. You know, there's other things like, I mean, when we talk about geography, we often talk about things because of the physical distance to travel. But there's also trade in services, which doesn't have to travel on a ship. But even there's trade friction. Because let's say you are providing some service that's not automated. So it needs a physical person to talk to you, legal advice, financial advice, whatever it is. So you offer it to someone in Portugal from London, that's fine. That's no problem. The language might be a barrier. So that's a form of trade friction, but you know. But if you're trying to offer it to someone in Tokyo, then the time zones are a problem because one of you's got to take that call at an unsociable time. David, they're saying with the euro, I just hate the name. Couldn't they just link the pound to the euro? One pound is €1. Then we could peg the pound to the euro. The problem with that is then we have zero control over monetary policy. In theory, we're not supposed to anyway, because monetary policy is managed by an independent central bank. And this is the madness of it. Like, you know, but we can influence, like the British Chancellor has more influence on the Bank of England than it could possibly have over the European Central Bank. But therein lies the thing. This is what I was saying about France and Germany might like it if we didn't join the euro, because if we joined the euro, we would get a seat on the board of the European Central Bank. So we would be having a say on monetary policy for the euro. So that would dilute, because we've got, in fact, because Britain has the largest, it has the only financial superpower in Europe. And because of that, we would instantly be the most influential, effectively EU member within the European Central Bank, because we would control most of the financial services within the area, right? Within the Eurozone. So that would massively dilute France and Germany's power. So it would be a case of, I mean, if Britain wanted to join the euro, then it's like, well, there's nothing really to be done about it. But if Britain comes along wanting to join the EU but not the euro, I can see France and Germany getting behind that, you know. But that's just my speculation. But if you were to peg the pound to the euro, so we still have pounds and notes and everything like that, we can do it, but then we just have no say over monetary policy at all. Interest rates will be set by the European, well, effectively, we'd still, I mean, yeah, we'd have no need for the Bank of England. It wouldn't be able to do anything, really. It would, I mean, we'd be printing the money, but that'd be it. So, yeah. What do I think about the recent uptick of doomsayers going about the UK being down the toilet and on a managed decline? The UK is cooked. Do you think these are based on some kind of reality? Yes, they are. They are still over-egging things, because I would argue we're not in decline as such. Because I look at what the government's doing, and it is transformatory. If you just think about something as simple as transitioning all of our energy needs on the national grid, at least, to renewable. So the idea is by 2030, 95% of our energy needs will not be from fossil fuels. It'll be from solar, wind, and some nuclear mostly. That's huge. Not just for the climate side of it, but economically that's huge, because it means events like this, all of a sudden the government don't have to like hopping about like a cat on a hot tin roof. It's not to say there's no impact of it, but like trying to help people out with the cost of oil heaters is probably the extent of it. Particularly as, again, and the trajectory of this, although we wouldn't have 95% of people transition to electric vehicles by then, that's where it's going. So you can imagine if the trajectory Labour are following on some of these issues were more universally, it wouldn't, in other words, it wouldn't matter who was winning power, they would do the same. Then this country would be on a path to, in the foreseeable future, being run mostly with electric vehicles, so internal transport electric vehicles, electricity supplied by non-fossil fuel means. So all of a sudden, argy-bargy amongst oil-producing nations, all of a sudden, not a big issue. Just that, and that's one thing they're doing. That is, but in terms of people thinking on managed decline in some areas, I think there is some validity in that. One thing I said after the 2024 election was the country in 2024 was worse than it was in 1997. So in 1997, a Conservative government that had been in power for a long, 17 years or something? No, it was more, 18 years. A Conservative government that had been in power for 18 years wrecked almost everything. Labour massively improved lots of things. There were some things that didn't really see major improvements, but the big things did. Education did. The NHS did. Pay did. Pay increased well above inflation. So lots of things improved. And then the Tories that came after it wrecked it all again. But to the point where it was worse than even in 1997. So basically, as far as I'm concerned, although there are still some things from the last Labour government that are still in place, on net, it's like all they did was stem the tide a little bit. So we're in a position now where I think things are worse than in 1997. And that's why I have some sympathy for the idea of decline, not managed decline, because managed decline means that the government are knowingly presiding over decline. I don't believe that. And I can point to lots of things that would counter that. But I do think that if Labour lose the next election and Reform UK get in, or some sort of Reform UK gestalt get in, they will again, by the time a decent government comes in, whatever form, things will be worse than they were in 2024. I think, In 2029, things will be significantly better than in 2024, but I think it will all be... And it's because destroying something is quicker and easier than building something up again. So the reason why I think this country is in not managed decline, but decline, is because I think we keep voting for governments that do not have our best interests at heart. And they can do their damage quicker than anyone can repair it. And in all honesty, if Labour do lose the next election, it is going to be down to numerous factors, but in no small part down to the fact that the public will decide that whatever improvements are coming are not quick or good enough. So they will vote for the wild card and make things worse. Just like in America. Why did the Democrats lose? Several reasons. You can blame all sorts of things. But primarily, it was because people felt that their standard of living under Biden was worse than under Trump. Why? Because of the COVID impacts. Biden actually improved things, but people felt worse off because he had to preside over that post-COVID period. So they went with Trump. How do they feel about that now? Pretty bad. They feel pretty bad about it. And the same thing can happen. I'm not saying this Iran war is the thing Labour would have won without it, because obviously I haven't been saying that. But you can imagine this Iran war triggering the sort of economic shitstorm that gets people thinking that, oh shit, life under Labour's even worse than it was under the Conservatives. And then they're basically smoked. Who was the Chancellor who said we'd only adopt the euro when it was at parity with the pound? I don't remember. I know Gordon Brown was against it. I think the reason we didn't join it from the first, by the way, was Gordon Brown, because he had complete say over economic policy. He came up with 5 tests, because he didn't want to look like he was just saying, no. So he came up with 5 tests. But the thing about 5 tests, whenever any chancellor comes up with 5 tests, they're always bullshit. Because it's really easy. You've already decided whether you approve of something or not. If you approve of it, you make sure your 5 tests will be met. And if you disapprove, you make sure that at least one of your 5 tests cannot possibly be met. It's a piece of piss. The 5 tests is always a con. Every single time it's applied, it's always a con. Because in reality, if a chancellor is going to be honest about economic tests, there's only one test. Is this net in the interests of this country? It's really it. That's all that's the only test you need. And the reason why they have 5 tests, by the way, is not because there's 5 tests. It's because the public can handle 5 things. It's why you have, going into an election, you have 5 big policies. Now, Labour in 2024 did buck the trend a little bit because they had 6 platform policies that they pushed. But in all honesty, that is because it was going to be 5. And then just because of the small boats issue, they had to sneak that one in as well in terms of the border force thing. So it wasn't because they thought we think the country can cope with 6. It's because they had 5 and they weren't willing to elbow any of those 5 out for the border force nonsense. Gordon Brown's 5 tests were basically don't want it. They always are. Every time a chancellor, I will guarantee, every time a chancellor says they've got 5 economic tests for whether they should do a thing or not, it's always because either they want to do it, and they want to be able to show that there's some scientific reason for doing it, or they don't want to do it and they want to claim there's some objective reason for not doing it. They're always a con one way or the other. The only economic test any chancellor should ever care about is this net good for this country? That's it. We need bus posters for Farage like the Musk ones. I mean, you're likely to get them come the election. Whether they're going to be good or not, I don't know. When I get paid, they say, what's this about turfing out? No one's turfing me out of South Devon. Well, the sea might in time. I'm not sure what that was in relation to. But anyway, I'll just have a little... I don't think anyone's actually mentioned who that Chancellor was, by the way. There saying, my siblings have long moved for good to Oz, but I came back, prefer it here. I would prefer it here. It is quite funny. You do get stories of a lot of people leaving Britain for Australia because they think great life, sunshine. For some reason in this country, we like the sunshine. I really don't know why. I quite like the lack of it. We've got vitamin D tablets. What do we need the sun for? But yeah, you get lots of people going, oh, nice and sunny. Everyone's chill in Australia. You know, barbecue on the beach on Christmas Day. Who wouldn't like that? It sounds all very appealing. And then they don't think about the downsides because there's downsides everywhere. You know, and the big downside in Australia, apart from actually, in my case, the sun is one of them. But generally speaking, the downsides would be that there are things scuttling around everywhere that can kill you in a second. That I would be afraid of dying every time I sat on the bog or even opened my car. So yeah, so I know I'm happy here. I'm not necessarily going to always be happy with the political arrangement. There are countries that I could, in theory, move to that have got more sensible politics, but I know I would miss the things here. I mean, I would, you know, I would move to Ireland. I would move to Ireland. It's similar enough. But anyway. Vitamin D supplements are overrated. We'll make it ourselves. You may make it yourself. I don't. I will tell you something. A few years ago, I'll leave you with this. A few years ago, when my GP wanted a blood test, and she tests for various things, including vitamin D. And this was an old doctor, right? So she's very experienced. And she went through the results for me. She said, these are the lowest vitamin D levels I've ever seen. And it's summer. To which I basically said, summer, winter makes little difference to me. I've got sun factor infinity with brick walls around me all the time. In fact, you know, and this is a long-term thing, you know, when I was a kid, when we went to Florida, I remember we went to Florida a couple of times, but I remember my dad moaning at me because he said I was embarrassing because I was embarrassing. He was the one in the goofy t-shirt and the bum bag, right? But I'm there in Florida, right, in the springtime, but still, it's still sunny there. And I'm wearing long sleeve shirt and long sleeve trousers and a big old hat and sunglasses and everything. So I'm basically covered, is what I'm saying. Even as a kid, didn't like the sun. So no, I don't really make a lot of vitamin D, but I have the tablets. Don't worry, my vitamin D levels are now fine. Every time I have a blood test now, I come back clean because it turns out that humans are very good at beating nature. But there we go. But there we are. We'll leave it there. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a great rest of evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.